It began with one woman on a hot July day in the summer of 1518. In the narrow streets of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, she stepped out of her modest home and began to dance. No music played, no festival was taking place, no one else moved with her. But she danced, and she could not stop. Witnesses later said her movements were wild, uncoordinated, a frenzy, not a celebration. Her feet bled, her body convulsed, but still she moved, spinning and shaking as if trapped in some invisible rhythm. Her name, according to local records, was Frau Troffea. Within a week, more than 30 people joined her. By the end of the month, over 400 were reported dancing, in the streets, in the squares, before churches, under the blazing summer sun. They danced until they collapsed, some from exhaustion, some, reportedly, to their deaths. This was no festival, this was no act of joy, this was the dancing plague of 1518, one of the strangest, most disturbing medical mysteries in recorded history. It's hard to imagine what it must have looked like. Hundreds of men and women, moving without control, as if possessed, sweating and trembling, eyes vacant, lips whispering prayers, feet pounding the cobblestones. The townspeople didn't laugh. They didn't join in. They were horrified. At first, they thought it was witchcraft, then divine punishment. Others believed the afflicted were cursed, paying for some unseen sin, yet the dancers themselves begged for help. They said they didn't want to move, that they couldn't stop. And so, the authorities did something that, today, seems unthinkable. They built a stage. They hired musicians. They hoped that if the dancers were allowed to move freely, the madness would burn itself out. But it didn't. The music only made it worse. The beat of drums, the cries of fiddles, it drove the afflicted deeper into their trance, as if feeding the fire. Soon, people began collapsing from exhaustion, heat stroke, and heart failure. Chroniclers wrote that dozens died from dancing, and still, no one knew why. To understand this event, we must step into the world of early 16th century Europe, a world that was fragile, fearful, and full of faith. Strasbourg in 1518 was a prosperous city, but its people were suffering. That summer was scorching hot. Food shortages loomed after poor harvests. Disease, the shadow of the plague, was always close. Religion dominated every aspect of life. The church held power, and the people feared divine wrath. When something inexplicable happened, they didn't look for bacteria or psychology. They looked for the hand of God or the devil. In that world, an outbreak of uncontrollable dancing was not just strange, it was terrifying. Strasbourg had seen strange things before. The Middle Ages were filled with tales of mass possession, visions, and miracles. But the dance mania of 1518 wasn't isolated. Records suggest that smaller outbreaks had occurred elsewhere, in Aachen, in Flanders, and along the Rhine, all during periods of hardship. Yet none matched the scale of what struck Strasbourg that summer. Chroniclers of the time described the city's streets as scenes of chaos and confusion. Doctors were called, priests were summoned, but their explanations only deepened the fear. Some believed the dancers were cursed by Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics, who, angered by sin, had struck them with madness. The local clergy advised a pilgrimage to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, hoping that penance might lift the curse. Others claimed the dancers were victims of hot blood, an imbalance of bodily humors caused by the summer heat. Doctors prescribed rest, cool baths, and even music to balance the spirits, but none of it worked. As weeks turned into months, the dance fever spread from neighborhood to neighborhood. Families tried to restrain their loved ones, but the afflicted slipped away, drawn inexplicably back to the streets. Imagine the sound, the pounding feet on cobblestones, the wails of exhaustion, the murmured prayers. Imagine the sight. A mother dancing beside her children, tears running down her face, unable to stop. The city's leaders grew desperate. Reports claimed that more than a dozen people died each day. Whether from exhaustion, dehydration, or heart attacks, no one knew for sure. But the death toll mounted. Finally, the council decided to act. The dancing was declared an epidemic, a threat to public order. And so, the authorities banned public music, closed taverns, and prohibited dancing entirely. Musicians who played for the afflicted were ordered to stop. Then, in a last act of faith, they gathered the remaining dancers and led them, under guard, to the shrine of Saint Vitus in nearby Saverne. There, priests placed their feet in holy water, made the sign of the cross, and prayed for deliverance. Within days, the dancing subsided. The city fell silent. But the mystery remained. What exactly happened in Strasbourg in 1518? Was it a disease, a mass hallucination, or something else, something beyond explanation? The records are incomplete, but the impact was unforgettable. Chroniclers describe the event in letters, diaries, and official reports, accounts that have survived for over 500 years. Even now, historians, psychologists, and scientists continue to debate what truly caused it. The dancing plague defies easy answers. It sits on the border between history and the unexplainable, a reminder that human behavior, under extreme stress, can cross into the realm of the uncanny. In the next part of our investigation, we'll look deeper into the strange theories that have emerged over centuries, from toxic bread to divine punishment, from social stress to supernatural forces. But the real question remains: why did hundreds of people, ordinary men and women, suddenly begin to dance themselves to death? This is Mystery Fact File. For centuries, people have asked the same haunting question: why did they dance? What force could make hundreds of men and women move against their will, through exhaustion, through pain, through death, as if some invisible hand were guiding them? The dancing plague of 1518 was not a myth. It was a documented historical event, and yet, it still feels impossible. To this day, historians, psychologists, and scientists have offered a wide range of theories, each one trying to bring logic to something that feels deeply irrational. But the truth remains elusive. Let's begin with the most famous theory: ergot poisoning. Some researchers believe the dancers had eaten rye bread contaminated with Claviceps purpurea, a fungus that grows on damp rye and produces chemicals similar to LSD. Ingesting ergot can cause convulsions, hallucinations, and muscle spasms. It can distort perception, induce panic, and create uncontrollable physical reactions. On paper, it sounds plausible. A hot, wet summer, spoiled rye, people consuming the same infected grain. The pieces seem to fit, but there's a problem. Ergot poisoning also causes intense pain, gangrene, and a burning sensation in the limbs. Symptoms so severe that victims usually can't even stand, let alone dance for days. Moreover, the outbreak lasted for months, far longer than the effects of ergot could explain. So, while the poisoned bread theory is appealing, it doesn't fully match the facts. Another theory goes deeper, not into biology but into psychology. Some historians suggest the people of Strasbourg were victims of mass hysteria, or what we now call mass psychogenic illness. This is when extreme stress, fear, or trauma triggers a shared physical reaction across a community, even without any physical cause. It's the mind's way of expressing unbearable pressure. Think of it as a psychological epidemic. When one person's body reacts, others, seeing it, unconsciously mimic the behavior. Before long, it spreads like wildfire. And Strasbourg in 1518 was a perfect storm for that. The city had endured famine, disease, and relentless religious fear. The people believed the wrath of God could strike at any moment. They lived under the constant weight of guilt and superstition. In that fragile mental state, the sight of Frau Troffea dancing uncontrollably could have triggered something deeper, a kind of emotional contagion. In modern terms, we might call it collective trauma. When fear and faith collide, the human mind can manifest strange, even dangerous behaviors. But there's something chilling about this theory. If the dancing plague was truly a psychological event, then hundreds of people were not dancing for joy. They were dancing from terror. Imagine the unbearable stress, the hunger, the sickness. And then one person breaks. Their body becomes the voice for what everyone else cannot express. And suddenly, hundreds follow. It's as if the city itself began to scream through movement. Now, there are those who refuse to believe it was just hysteria. They see the event as something darker, a divine curse, or perhaps a supernatural punishment. To the people of Strasbourg, Saint Vitus was no myth. He was believed to protect against seizures and mental disorders. But if angered, he could also inflict them. The afflicted were said to have been struck by Saint Vitus's dance, a phrase that entered medieval folklore. When the Church declared that the dancers were victims of Saint Vitus's wrath, people believed it wholeheartedly. So they prayed, they made pilgrimages, they bathed their feet in holy water, and slowly the epidemic subsided. Coincidence or something else? To modern minds, the idea of divine punishment may sound absurd. But in 1518, faith was reality. People saw miracles and curses in everyday life. To them, what happened in Strasbourg wasn't strange, it was spiritual justice. And that belief may have been part of the cure. When the afflicted were taken to the shrine, they were removed from the city's panic, surrounded by ritual, order, and faith. Whether through psychology or spirituality, their symptoms faded. Perhaps belief both caused and cured the plague. Fast forward to the modern day. The dancing plague has become a case study for scholars of psychology, sociology, and religion. It sits at the crossroads of science and superstition, where logic strains to explain the inexplicable. We now know that mass psychogenic illness is real. It has appeared in schools, factories, and entire villages. Groups of people suddenly faint, tremble, or laugh uncontrollably without any medical cause. Stress, fear, or social tension can trigger it, especially in close-knit, highly religious communities. And that's exactly what Strasbourg was. So yes, perhaps this was an early case of psychological contagion. But that answer, while reasonable, still feels incomplete. Because the reports from 1518 describe more than just fainting or convulsing. They describe rhythm. They describe dance. And that's the detail that haunts researchers to this day. Why dance? Why not scream, or run, or fall unconscious? Why this one movement spreading like wildfire through a city? Some suggest it was cultural. Dance had a sacred meaning in medieval Europe, a connection to both joy and sin. It was used in rituals, festivals, and even punishments. There are accounts of people performing dance penance, moving their bodies in repentance for sin, seeking forgiveness through suffering. So perhaps, subconsciously, the dancers believed they were atoning. But there's another possibility, one more unsettling. What if the dancing wasn't just metaphorical? What if something triggered a neurological or infectious response that science still doesn't fully understand? There have been rare, modern cases of epidemic chorea, uncontrolled rhythmic movements caused by infection, toxins, or autoimmune reactions in the brain. Could the 1518 outbreak have been an early form of that? The evidence is thin, but not impossible. Whatever the cause, the event's symbolism cannot be ignored. The dancing plague has become more than a mystery. It's a mirror. It reflects the fragility of the human mind. It shows how easily fear, faith, and stress can merge into something uncontrollable, something that defies both logic and reason. And yet, in that chaos, there's something profoundly human. The people of Strasbourg weren't monsters or fools. They were people like us, struggling, afraid, trying to find meaning in a world that often felt hostile and cruel. When words failed them, their bodies spoke instead. Through movement, they expressed the pain, the terror, and perhaps the hope that something, anything, might save them. By late summer, the dancing slowed. The records don't tell us what happened to Frau Troffea or the hundreds who followed her. They simply disappear from history, as if the city itself wanted to forget. But the memory lingered. For centuries afterward, people told stories of the cursed summer when the citizens of Strasbourg danced without reason, when life and death blurred to the sound of invisible music. Some say it was a plague of the body, others a plague of the mind, and still others a plague of the soul. Whatever it was, it reminds us that mystery lies not only in the supernatural, but in ourselves. Even today, more than 5 centuries later, the dancing plague of 1518 remains one of the most mysterious and disturbing public health enigmas in human history. How could hundreds of seemingly ordinary people, living quiet lives in a medieval European town, suddenly be overcome with an uncontrollable urge to dance, even to their deaths? Historians, physicians, and psychologists have long debated what truly happened that summer in Strasbourg. The most famous explanation is mass hysteria, or what scientists today call mass psychogenic illness. According to this theory, the townspeople were not possessed or poisoned, but trapped in a shared psychological state of panic and trauma. Remember, Strasbourg was suffering through a brutal period: crop failures, starvation, outbreaks of disease, and deep religious anxiety. Many believed that God was angry with them. Others feared the devil's hand in their misfortune. In such an atmosphere, stress and fear can become contagious. In moments of collective trauma, humans have an astonishing ability to mirror one another's emotions. One person's nervous breakdown can ignite another's, and before long, the entire community can spiral into shared delusion or panic. The people of 1518 may have unconsciously mimicked the convulsions and motions of Frau Troffea, the first dancer, until it became a citywide psychosis. Another leading theory points to ergot poisoning, a toxic fungus that grows on damp rye grain and can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and muscle spasms. Ergot contains compounds similar to LSD, and outbreaks of St. Anthony's fire, ergot poisoning, were known to cause madness in the Middle Ages. Could the people of Strasbourg have eaten contaminated bread that triggered their bizarre dancing fits? It's a compelling idea. The region had been hit with wet weather and poor harvests. Rye, stored improperly, could easily have developed ergot mold. The symptoms, spasms, muscle pain, strange visions, line up eerily with reports from 1518. However, skeptics argue that ergot poisoning typically causes weakness and paralysis, not continuous dancing. Moreover, those affected would not likely have moved in unison or survived long enough to dance for days. Then there's the religious explanation, one that fit the mindset of the 16th century perfectly. Many people in Strasbourg believed in saints with the power to both bless and curse. One such figure was Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics. It was said that those who angered Saint Vitus could be struck with a terrible curse, a dance of penance that could not be stopped until forgiven. Some even called the plague Saint Vitus's dance. desperate townspeople believed they had angered the saint. In their panic, they built shrines, offered prayers, and even carried the dancers to chapels dedicated to Saint Vitus. Ironically, these acts of devotion may have made the hysteria worse, reinforcing the idea that a supernatural curse was real. Modern researchers have also proposed that the event was a kind of cultural trance, a psychological state triggered by extreme social conditions and belief systems. In other words, the dancers may have been experiencing something similar to religious ecstasy, an involuntary trance-like state amplified by the expectations of their community. Once the idea of divine punishment through dancing took hold, more and more people began to believe they too were cursed, and their bodies responded accordingly. There's also an intriguing theory about socio-political control. Some historians suggest that local leaders in the church may have used the dancing plague to manipulate public fear, keeping the population obedient during a time of social unrest. Whether true or not, such speculation only deepens the mystery surrounding Strasbourg's deadly dance. By late August, the frenzy began to fade. The last dancers collapsed, exhausted or dead, and the city returned to a haunting silence. No official record explains how or why it stopped, only that it did. Some say the townspeople finally found peace through prayer. Others believe the victims simply danced themselves to death. The truth, it seems, died with them. The dancing plague of 1518 left an indelible scar on the memory of Europe. For centuries, chroniclers, physicians, and theologians struggled to make sense of what they had witnessed. Even now, it stands as a powerful reminder of how fragile the human mind and society can be under pressure. From a psychological standpoint, the event demonstrates the power of mass suggestion and collective belief. When a community shares the same fears, superstitions, and stresses, it becomes fertile ground for hysteria to spread like wildfire. Strasbourg's dancers were not mad. They were human beings caught in a wave of panic that blurred the line between body and mind. But there's another layer to this mystery, one that reaches beyond science. The story of the dancing plague continues to fascinate us because it embodies a terrifying question. Can our minds truly make our bodies lose control? Can belief, fear, or despair manifest so powerfully that it takes physical form, even to the point of death? Some historians argue that the people of Strasbourg were victims of an extreme psychological outbreak, one triggered by famine, religion, and fear. Others insist something more mystical occurred, something that still defies modern explanation. What if there really was a force, spiritual or otherwise, that compelled these people to dance against their will? What if the so-called Curse of Saint Vitus was more than just a metaphor? The dancing plague has inspired countless works of art, novels, music, and films. It's been studied by psychiatrists and anthropologists as one of history's most dramatic examples of collective delusion. Yet, despite centuries of research, no single theory has ever been universally accepted. The deeper we dig, the stranger it seems. Even today, echoes of 1518 can be found in modern society. Episodes of mass hysteria have reappeared throughout history, from fainting outbreaks in schools to laughing epidemics in villages. Each case serves as a faint reminder that the boundary between the mind and the body is far thinner than we like to believe. As the 16th century chronicler Johann Schilter wrote, "Many perished, and yet none could stop dancing, as though their souls were commanded by another will." His words still send a chill down the spine centuries later. Perhaps the dancing plague of 1518 is not a story of madness, but of human vulnerability, the power of belief, fear, and desperation when they collide. A tragic dance born not of joy, but of survival. And so, the mystery remains. Why did they dance? What unseen force took hold of them? And could it happen again? We may never know the answers, but the story of Strasbourg stands as a haunting warning that even in the heart of civilization, mystery still reigns. If you found this story as chilling and fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mystery Fact File for more deep dives into the world's strangest true mysteries. And tell us in the comments, what do you think caused the dancing plague of 1518? Madness, poison, faith, or something far darker?